Now, over to distinguished speaker, Dr. Bertoline.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. As you've heard my introduction, I was the president of my 7th grade class. I'm just finishing up my 3rd year as dean with a very, very transformative initiative that I'll be explaining. And after I've started on this, I have a lot of my faculty thinking I need to go back to the 7th grade. Well, we'll talk about what we're attempting to do, but what I'm really going to focus on this morning is the rationale behind why I believe this nation needs to look at engineering education as a continuum, look at where we have weaknesses, and then what we might be able to do in order to make those changes. Okay? This is not an indictment against engineering education as it is right now. As you know, we do engineering education better than anyone in the world. We see that every day at Purdue with the thousands and thousands of students that come from foreign countries. They flood onto our campuses all over this nation because they want a great engineering education. I'm looking at this more from the eyes of industry and what industry needs in the nation, and what I view as a gap in what we're doing to prepare engineers. This actually is a really good lead-in for the next speaker. Cindy is going to talk about historically challenges that engineering education has had and how those engineering educators actually went about doing it. And this really is a culture change for our college, and it could be a culture change for what's going on in the nation. So with that setup, I'm going to frame this that engineering, the word engineering, can be thought of as both a behavior and a discipline. And I think what happens many times is we have a very difficult time distinguishing between the behavior, which is the action, which you don't need an engineering degree to actually do engineering, okay? That's the behavior, versus the discipline. And when you start talking about the discipline, which everyone in this room has their own ideas of what the engineering discipline should be, and it has historical artifacts and what we're doing now. We sometimes get caught up in looking at it only as a discipline instead of a behavior. I want you to think about this as a behavior first, and then we'll pull back and look at it as a discipline. So if you look at the word, actually the word and the definition, it talks more about behaviors, to contrive, devise. All right? That's the behavior that's being done by humans. The historical context of why we're at where we're at starts primarily with the Grinter report. There's other artifacts that I can talk about, but I don't have enough time to really go that deeply into it. But what most people don't know until they start reading the literature on this is that the Grinter report, obviously we all know that it moved to scientifically oriented engineering curricula. It pretty much abandons practical engineering curricula, and therefore engineering technology programs like the one at Purdue that started in 1964, so we just celebrated our 50th anniversary, were created. Most of our faculty that started in engineering technology in 1964 actually came from engineering. They were more practical and applied, and they wanted to continue down that path. What most people don't know about the Grinter report is that the committee actually had 2 recommendations. One was that we needed to create a new type of engineering curricula that's more scientifically and theoretically based, but we needed to continue the more practical type of engineering. And the engineering leadership and faculty rejected staying with the more applied, and nearly every engineering school in the nation decided to go more theoretical and scientifically based. And it was the right decision. No one's questioning that decision. It was a great decision. It's why we are so successful as a nation. But the whole deals with that other recommendation about bifurcating engineering ed. And that is the problem which I'll get into. The other thing I want to talk about is that this is very industry-driven. Industry, in many cases, especially at small and medium-sized businesses in industry, see that many of the graduates that they go out and recruit are more theoretical than they really need in that organization. There's times when they need a very theoretical engineer, but there's times when they need a more practical one. They'd like to see it all wrapped up in one person, but that's not really the way it is, okay? Now, again, very broad brush strokes here, okay? Just stay with me for a while before you start throwing stuff. Also, if you think about it, you know, we could try and modify the theoretically based engineering programs, make them much more applied. But the question you have to ask yourself is, why would you want to do that when what you're doing is so successful already? And why move too far from your core competencies and what you're really good at? I'm suggesting a different path, which I'll get to. And as you know, we wrap all this up into, is higher ed really worth it? Okay, there's a lot of that dialogue. So higher education in general is under great pressure right now. And when industry comes and talks to us and says that, you know, this is the type of graduate we want and we're not really getting it, that's part of the issue that we have also. And I'll explain some of the things that they're really looking for, at least from what I'm hearing. To try to fill the gap, if you think about it, I just made this up, there are boutique engineering programs. Now, that's said in an affectionate way, okay? All right? These boutique programs, it fills the void that was originally created by the Bridger Report in different ways. They're normally smaller programs, not at large research institutes. And examples are ones like Rose-Hulman, Harvey Mudd, WPI, and Olin. They all have their different flavor or different technique that expands kind of the original definition of what engineering education is. And they all have different ways of going about it. In fact, if you look at the U.S. News and World Report's top 10 engineering undergraduate programs at non-doctoral universities, all of those are in the top 10. They've done something very, very different. In fact, Olin, if you know anything about them, they've only been around for about 10 years. They started from scratch. Nothing. It was a brand new program in university, and they're right now, I think, ranked 3rd or 4th nationally. And it's because they've transformed the way they teach engineering education. You can look that up online. I'm going to refer to that just a little bit later on. Then you look at Germany and how Germany attacked this problem. Germany is highly successful, highly competitive, even though if you look at their wages that they pay people in manufacturing, or computer science, or whatever, they're much higher than ours. They are still able to be extremely competitive. And if you look at it, they started in the late 60s with creating 2 types of primary universities. The technical universities, which is the scientifically prepared engineers, which are the kind that we are most familiar with in this nation at research-intensive universities, and then universities of applied sciences. That is where they do things which are much more application-oriented and much more in concert with the needs of business and industry. Okay? They actually call it applied engineering in that nation. They do things like require internships with business and industry. They have year-long senior thesis-based industry-sponsored projects to get the students to graduate with a practical engineering. They still have theory, but they focus on the practice of it. And this is a thing that is also amazing. Germany graduates twice as many applied engineers as theoretical engineers. Now, I know it's hard to kind of count those and what that really means, but if you just look at the ASEE publication that comes out every year, that lists out the number of graduates in our theoretically or research-based engineering programs, and there's a smaller section in there about the engineering technology programs. That publication shows that there are twice as many theoretical engineers graduated in this nation versus the more practical, which would be the engineering technology. So we haven't flipped, if you believe those numbers. I don't necessarily believe them because I'm not sure ASEE is capturing all the engineering technology types of programs in the nation. But we certainly aren't graduating at the ratio that Germany is. And to show how this problem is a national issue, just in the last 2 or 3 weeks, there's 2 articles. One was actually a PBS interview from the BMW's head of workforce development for the Americas. And the other one is the Wall Street Journal that basically talks about Germany's success story in manufacturing and why. I highly recommend that you go to these articles. This interview, he's talking about the BMW plant in South Carolina, how they cannot find the types of engineers they need. And you can't, you start questioning what's going on. We don't have this problem in Germany. No, he's trying to work with the local universities and community colleges to come up with the type of graduate they actually need, because the U.S. is not providing the kinds of graduates that Germany expects. Okay? And then the next article, this is really based more on the Fraunhofer, but this is more when we get into the TRL levels 4 through 7 research, and how Germany has made a national practice of doing this. And our nation, we don't do as much of it, okay? We do a very good job with the theoretical kind of it, of research, but the more practical, applied side is pretty much ignored, or at least not done in a fashion that is well organized. There's a very large initiative by President Obama to create regional centers for manufacturing, and actually around this idea of creating Fraunhofer-like applied research institutes is what it amounts to. That's oversimplifying. So now let's get back to the idea of behaviors. So if you think of engineering education as a continuum, it actually starts in high school with technical career education, career centers. You have engineering technicians, which are primarily at the community college level, and they prepare associates and political science and associate applied sciences, a little less theoretical. And then I'm just throwing this in here to start a riot. This is kind of where I think we need to emphasize a little bit more, but let's just call it applied engineering using the German term. And then I'm just using the word engineering science, even though we know the undergraduate programs aren't really engineering science, although there are programs like that in the theoretically based engineering. But the fact is that if you look at engineering as a behavior, you have the very applied and very theoretical. And there's a continuum, and business and industry in this nation needs all of those. And we ignore any one of those at our risk of being competitive nationally and globally. And that's the premise that I'm trying to talk about to set up here. The question is if you believe what I've just said, if you kind of buy into this rationale, the question is for engineering education is how do we do that? How can we improve what we're doing? I think we need to improve in all of these. I'm not suggesting that we need to ignore any of them. I'm going to talk about this one in a model that I think we should be doing. So basically, there are 3 types of engineering programs right now. I've talked about the first 2. The third one is the more applied, primarily engineering technology programs. They offer both AS and BS degrees, mostly not at research-intensive universities. Okay, if you look at the 108 Carnegie research-intensive universities in this nation, there's engineering technology at Purdue, there's engineering technology at the University of Houston, there's engineering technology, a few programs within the College of Engineering at Texas A&M. There were programs at Arizona State at the Polytechnic campus, which they just announced recently they're merging with engineering. And I'm done. There's a couple at University of Cincinnati, by the way. But they're doing something funky because last time I went to the website, they said they're not admitting students to some of the programs. I don't really know what's going on there. But other than that, that's about it. And so most engineering technology programs are at the smaller state universities, not the flagship universities. And so that is one of the reasons that the engineering technology sometimes isn't even assumed to be part of the engineering curriculum. Again, if you look at it as a behavior, we're preparing engineers just like the research-intensive engineers. It's just a different type and fulfills a different need. I'm advocating that there's actually a fourth type of engineering that we can start developing in this nation, okay? So again, if you go back to here, what would that fourth be? Well, it's probably somewhere in this area. I don't know exactly where. We have to, that's what we're up to right now, is trying to develop that. It's similar to the German applied science universities, but it's meeting the 21st century needs of business and industry, and I'll come to that, because it's very important what I'm about to talk about. So this, what it does, it blends theory with practice. The second point is what the industry is really begging for. It's the integration of the related topics in the learning so that you have a more broadly and deeply prepared, in this case more applied or practical engineer to fulfill a need. They're application-oriented curricula that's more at the system or enterprise level. So think of large initiative, product design and production, and everything that goes underneath that. The construction management, managing the construction process. Not an MBA kind of management, but one that is highly skilled and understands the construction process. And you can name others. It comes down to something that's getting a lot of attention in industry. It's called a T-shaped professional. Has anyone heard of that? Okay, there's a few. It's starting to get more and more. It's really being pushed right now by IBM. And they have a conference every year. Next year's conference is at Michigan State University. It's in March. So let's go back to what we're doing. We're trying to fill this gap that I just described. This initiative we're calling the Purdue Polytechnic Institute. That's a working name. We're not sure if that works or not. I mean, there's some places where that word around the world actually isn't very good, okay? It has certain connotations, but we needed something to start rallying around. But the reason that we picked this name is you have to look at the original definition. In 1794, France came up with the first engineering university called École Polytechnique. And what it does is it's relating to or devoted to instruction in many technical arts or applied sciences. That's what poly is for. And it's a blend of scientific theory and engineering practice. So going back to the root meaning of what Polytech was, and now trying to apply it to the 21st century. And so what you have here is we're going to take that original definition and attributes, but we're going to then start blending in, especially the liberal arts and the math and science, so that they learn those topics in context. Again, it's almost like you're applying the math. You're applying the science, you're applying the communication. Everything is done in an application-oriented manner. Why do we need to do that? It's because the world has fundamentally changed. Okay? Right? Get back to that cubicle and start thinking outside the box. All right? That's kind of what we expect everyone to be creative, because everyone wants to innovate. Industries, living in a very competitive global world, they want creative people, they want innovators. But you can't force it, and if they're not prepared to do it because we aren't preparing them, then we need to rethink some of that. So these are some of the attributes that industry is looking for. In fact, if you look at the top 5 needs of industry through this one publication, you will see that the top one is critical thinking and problem solving. Okay? The second one is information technology application. That's just kind of like the world's full of computers, and we have to know how to use them as effectively as possible. There's creativity and innovation, teamwork and collaboration, and diversity. Most of those aren't really in a fundamental engineering textbook, right? These are top-off kinds of things that we need to broaden the education of the workforce and what we need going forward. Students have changed. I highly recommend that you read this book. It's titled Generation on a Tightrope. It's by Arthur Levine and Diane Dean. They interviewed freshman students about a year and a half ago at 20 different universities, all shapes and sizes, one of which happened to be Purdue University. You know how when you read a book and you highlight it, about 20% of the chapters might be highlighted? The last chapter, which is the recommendations, when I read it, I highlighted 80% of it. So they had so many great recommendations because you are able to get in the head and the aspirations and the motivations of what students coming out of high school want, and they're actually very different, especially for my generation. And that book does a really good job to set the stage for the kind of teaching experiences and learning experiences we should be trying to do in higher ed. So there's actually a new culture for students. It's things like students learning just in time through the integration of these topics. Students are receiving credit for everything they learn. How many people, I mean, when I was teaching undergraduate, I used to remember my most enjoyable teaching moments was when I did independent studies with students. And I'll never forget the time when Autodesk came out with their animation software, okay? And I gave a student the animation software as an independent study. I said, go and do good things with it, all right? I have no idea what this is about. He's now working for ILM, all right? We didn't have a program. We didn't have animation courses. He just went in and he learned it because he was self-motivated. He loved what he was doing. He dug as deep as possible, no formal instruction, no credit for it, yet set him up professionally for the rest of his life. Those are the kinds of experiences that we want to give credit for. And that's this new changed learning environment. This is the big one, and this is one that relates to Cindy's. And this is a culture change for faculty. You're talking about faculty becoming a mentor. If I was lecturing next fall in our first prototyping class, I would have had to sit down about 8 minutes ago. We don't think you should be talking for more about 10 minutes because you want to get with the students and start working with them. And you expect them to learn offline and come in with good questions. But that's a real culture change for the faculty because we all think we're experts. And we are. That's why we're at our great universities. But it's hard to give that up. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but it goes to the core of a culture shift. And culture shifts, if you know anything, take about 3 to 5 years. All right? We're in about year 1 of this. When I started, I had jet black hair, and I'm 38 years old. I'm not showing the makeup, okay, but we're working on it. This is what IBM and others are talking to T-shaped professional. We do this better than anyone in the world in all forms of engineering. The depth of knowledge, technical content, we have that down cold. Domain theory, domain fundamentals, problem solving skills, and research skills. This is where we're lacking up here. We can cross the T because we're not doing it in an integrated fashion. When you'll be amazed at this. When we went to the communications faculty and said, we would like to work with you. We don't want you working for us, we want you working with us. The communications department at Purdue, every student has to take COM 114. Okay? That's about 6,500 students every year. When we talked to them, I thought they were going to get up and hug me and say we would love the opportunity to figure out how to deliver our COM courses better. The same thing happened with math. It took a little longer. But they didn't like the way they did calculus either. And the same thing happened with English. And my colleague and co-author on this, Bob Mameli, raise your hand, because if this doesn't go well, I want someone to share. She's back there. She's leading this more experimental stuff and dealing with these things, okay? And she's the one that's going out making all these connections. And then you have to take the third dimension, which is the methodology. What can you do teaching methodology-wise in order to do this? This is taking a flipped classroom and really putting it on steroids, if you know anything about flipped classroom. So I'm gonna finish up here quickly. There's a few common things that look very German-like in the Common Core that we're suggesting. The challenge is it's challenging the status quo in the engineering education curriculum. It's a culture change, and industry expect to actively engage with higher ed. We have to raise the game on the part of industry. One of the most difficult things we have is trying to get our industry to act more like German industry, which they've bought into this, and they work with their higher education institutes at a much higher level than ours do. So I'm going to bike off in the sunset. There'll be time for questions.